A knight's loyalty is tested as England burns in civil war. Torn between honour and survival, Sir Edmund Mallory faces betrayal, shifting allegiances, and the haunting cost of duty. As the lines between friend and foe blur, he must decide how far he'll go to protect his family and what he's willing to sacrifice for a crown forged in ashes. The first rays of dawn crept cautiously over the rolling hills of the English countryside, casting a pale glow upon the modest stone manor that bore the Mallory name. Inside, Sir Edmund Mallory sat alone in his chamber, the early light filtering unevenly through narrow, leaded glass windows. The air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of damp earth and the ever-present smoke from the hearth that had yet to be stoked this morning. With deliberate care, Edmund ran the whetstone along the blade of his sword, the rasping sound punctuating the stillness. His hands, calloused from years of training and battle, moved with practiced precision. Though a minor knight, his life was defined by such moments: the readiness to defend, the quiet discipline before the storm. Yet today, the weight on his shoulders felt heavier than any armour. The Wars of the Roses had fractured England, tearing apart loyalties and bloodlines with ruthless efficiency. The once stable realm now simmered with unrest, the ancient houses of Lancaster and York locked in bitter contention for the crown. For men like Edmund, caught in the crossfire, survival depended as much on political acumen as on skill with sword and shield. His thoughts drifted to his family, Lady Eleanor, his steadfast wife, and their 2 young children who slept peacefully in chambers down the hall. Their lives, so distant from the grand halls of power, were fragile threads woven into this tapestry of chaos. A soft knock at the door drew Edmund's attention. Lady Eleanor entered quietly, her eyes reflecting the weight she bore. "Edmund," she began, her voice low yet clear, "the news from the north grows darker. Yorkist forces gather swiftly." He nodded, sheathing his sword with a measured calm he did not entirely feel. "I know," he replied, "but our loyalty must not waver. The crown belongs to Lancaster." Her gaze softened, but concern lingered. "Loyalty is noble, but blind faith can be a sword turned against us. We must be wary." Edmund reached for her hand, the touch grounding him. "I will protect our family. Whatever comes, that I promise." Later, in the small chapel adjacent to their home, Brother Matthew knelt before the altar, his prayerful whispers weaving through the quiet stone walls. The old monk had been a pillar of counsel for Edmund since his knighthood, offering guidance when the path was unclear. "God grant us wisdom," Matthew murmured, eyes closed. "In these dark days, let not ambition blind our hearts, nor fear freeze our hands." Edmund entered, bowing his head in silent respect. The burden of the times pressed upon them all, but the flickering candlelight offered a fragile hope. Outside, the realm stirred. Riders bearing hastily scrawled messages thundered across the countryside, heralding the shifting tides of war. In the great hall of the Mallory estate, retainers gathered, their voices hushed and urgent as they absorbed the latest reports. The tension was palpable. Every man and woman sensed the peril lurking beyond their borders. Amid the murmurs, Edmund stood resolute. His modest status afforded him little influence, yet his loyalty burned fiercely. He was a knight sworn to his liege, bound by honour and blood to House Lancaster. But even as he pledged himself, the seeds of doubt took root. Nourished by the whispers of betrayal and the encroaching shadow of York, that evening, beneath a sky heavy with gathering clouds, Edmund walked the ramparts of his estate, the cold wind biting through his cloak. The land he defended was scarred by years of conflict, its people weary and wary. Yet, in the depths of his heart, a flame of hope flickered stubbornly. For honor, he whispered into the night, and for those I love. But the war was not yet done testing him. The fractured allegiance of a divided kingdom had only just begun to unravel the man beneath the knight's armor. As the candle in his chamber guttered low, Edmund's thoughts returned to the coming days. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and impossible choices. Yet he would face it, as he always had, steady, resolute, and bound by a loyalty that might one day cost him everything. Outside, the first distant echoes of war stirred the air, a grim herald of the storm to come. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and the hurried footsteps echoed sharply through the stone corridors of Mallory Keep. Sir Edmund Mallory, sitting by the low oak table in the great hall, looked up as a breathless messenger approached, clutching a folded parchment with trembling hands. The flickering torchlight cast a wavering glow, throwing the knight's weathered face into sharp relief, his keen eyes narrowing as he took in the urgency that clung to the youth like a chill wind. "My lord," the messenger gasped, "news from the northern borders. The Yorkists move swiftly stronger than before. Their banners march ever closer to Lancaster lands." Edmund straightened, the weight of the words settling upon his broad shoulders. He had known the war was far from over, but each new report chipped away at the fragile confidence he clung to. The Wars of the Roses were no distant tale to him. They were a relentless storm battering the very foundations of his world. From the shadows, the soft rustle of silk announced the arrival of Lady Eleanor, her presence both a comfort and a reminder of the stakes beyond the battlefield. She approached, her elegant figure framed by the dancing flames of the hearth. Her eyes, resolute and sharp, met Edmund's troubled gaze with quiet understanding. "The Yorkists grow bolder," she said softly, "but so too must we be wise. Blind loyalty to a cause can be a death sentence, Edmund. You must tread carefully." He looked away, biting the inside of his cheek. His heart wavered between duty and survival, honor and pragmatism. Lady Eleanor's words, tempered with compassion and sharp insight, cut through the fog of his fears. She was right. The war was not just fought with sword and shield, but with cunning and caution. That night, Edmund retired to his chamber, the flickering candlelight barely piercing the gloom. He stood at the window, gazing out into the restless night where the wind whispered through the trees like a warning. The distant hoot of an owl echoed the unease settling deep within him. Thoughts churned relentlessly. Could he remain steadfast to Lancaster when the very ground beneath them shifted like sand? He thought of his family, of Lady Eleanor, and the children who depended on him. His loyalty was more than allegiance to a house. It was a promise to protect those he loved. Yet the path to survival was tangled with betrayal and sacrifice. Before him lay a rough-hewn map of England, pinned to the table with heavy stones. His fingers hovered uncertainly over the contested lands, where York and Lancaster clashed like thunderous waves. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the ghosts of battles yet to come. His breath came shallow as the magnitude of his choices bore down. The whispers of war grew louder, and Edmund knew that the coming days would test every fibre of his being. Would he remain loyal to a cause that might doom him? Or would survival demand a darker path? The night deepened, but Edmund Mallory remained awake, caught in the storm between loyalty and survival. The fragile hope of peace buried beneath the ashes of a kingdom torn apart. As dawn approached, the first light crept hesitantly through the narrow window, casting a pale glow on Edmund's determined face. The war was far from over, and so too was his struggle within. The early morning mist clung to the woods like a shroud as Sir Edmund Mallory rode cautiously along the narrow track winding through the ancient oaks. His armour, though well maintained, bore the dull sheen of hard use, a testament to the relentless demands of a knight caught in the shifting tides of civil war. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, but beneath it lay a more subtle tension, one that prickled at Edmund's senses like the bite of the cold. It was here, on this contested borderland between Lancastrian and Yorkist territories, that he would meet his rival for the first time. Sir Thomas Grey, a name whispered with equal parts fear and resentment among the Lancastrian minor nobility, had become a spectre of opposition, a relentless shadow cast by the ambitions of House York. As Edmund approached the clearing, the faint crunch of hooves on frost-hardened leaves was abruptly joined by the low snort of another horse. From the mist stepped Sir Thomas, his presence as imposing as the gnarled trees themselves. His scarred face caught the weak morning light, the jagged mark running from temple to jaw, a stark reminder of past violence. Perhaps a duel's cruel echo. Thomas's eyes, cold and calculating, met Edmund's without hesitation. There was no warmth, no pretense of camaraderie, only the hard edge of rivalry carved by years of conflict and personal grievance. "Sir Edmund Mallory," Thomas said, his voice low and steady, "I had hoped our paths might not cross so soon. Yet fate seems eager to test us both." Edmund dismounted slowly, the leather creaking under his weight. "Sir Thomas Grey," he replied, his own voice firm, though his heart beat unevenly in his chest. "This land grows smaller with each passing day, and men like us are bound to collide." The tension was palpable, a taut string ready to snap. Their mutual disdain was no secret, fueled by a duel fought years prior, a clash that had left wounds, not just on their skins, but in their very souls. Yet the stakes now were far greater than personal vendettas. They stood as embodiments of two houses locked in a deadly dance for England's crown. "You still cling to your Lancastrian loyalty," Thomas said, a faint sneer twisting his lips. "But the Yorkists will not be so easily dismissed." Edmund met the challenge squarely. "Neither will we." Without further words, the knights mounted and faced each other across the clearing. The clash of steel soon shattered the morning's fragile silence. Each strike was sharp and precise, a deadly conversation between two men bound by duty and driven by ambition. Edmund's sword sang through the air, his movements fueled by years of training and the desperate hope to protect his family and honor. Thomas countered with brutal efficiency, every blow a reminder of his unyielding resolve. The duel was more than a test of skill. It was a manifestation of the wider conflict, tearing England apart, loyalty against ambition, honor against survival. As the sun climbed higher, casting dappled light through the canopy, both men paused, breaths ragged, bodies bruised but spirits unbroken. Thomas's gaze bore into Edmund's with a mixture of respect and warning. "You underestimate the Yorkist shadow," he said quietly. "It stretches long and dark." Edmund nodded slowly, the weight of those words settling heavily upon him. The war was no longer distant murmurs or courtly intrigue. It was here, embodied in the fierce determination of men like Thomas Grey. Later that night, by the flickering glow of the hearth, Edmund sat in quiet contemplation. The firelight danced across the worn wood and his weathered face, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror his own doubts. The wolf's distant howl echoed through the stillness, a haunting reminder of the wild forces at play. He thought of Lady Eleanor's cautious counsel, of Brother Matthew's prayers for peace, and of the dangerous path that lay ahead. The Yorkist threat was no mere rumour or distant enemy. It was a living, breathing force, relentless and unforgiving. and Edmund knew that to survive, he must navigate this shadow with both courage and cunning, lest he be consumed by it. The chapter closed with Edmund staring out into the darkness beyond the castle walls, the weight of his choices pressing down like the cold night air. The war was far from over, and the Yorkist shadow loomed larger than ever. What sacrifices would be demanded of him? How long could honor survive in the face of such relentless ambition? And when the time came, would Edmund stand firm or be swallowed by the very darkness he sought to resist? The answers were yet to come, but the first move had been made, and the game of power was only beginning. The evening air lay heavy with the scent of burning tallow as Sir Edmund Mallory crossed the threshold into the familiar warmth of his family's chamber. The modest room, furnished with sturdy oak and draped in faded tapestries, seemed a refuge from the chaos that had swallowed much of the kingdom. A low fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced along the stone walls. Edmund's keen eyes, often sharp with the vigilance of a soldier, softened as they met the steady gaze of Lady Eleanor. She sat poised at a small writing desk near the window, her posture elegant but tense. The pale light of dusk filtered through the lattice, catching the delicate curve of her resolute eyes and the graceful line of her jaw. In her hands, a folded letter waited to be sealed. The wax seal, warm from the small flame she had just extinguished, bore the emblem of the Mallory family, but the contents were far from ordinary correspondence. "You've been quiet this evening," Eleanor said softly, her voice a balm against the relentless storm outside. "The men grow restless, and the court's whispers grow darker by the day." Edmund sighed, the weight of his armor feeling heavier than the metal itself. He removed his gauntlets, revealing hands calloused from battle, yet gentle enough to brush a stray lock of hair from Eleanor's face. "The Yorkists advance with more than just swords now, Eleanor. They wield secrets and shadows. Loyalty is no shield against their reach." She nodded, her eyes reflecting both fear and fierce determination. "And yet, we must hold to what we have. Our family, our honor." Their conversation was interrupted by the soft creak of the door as Brother Matthew entered, his monastic robes whispering against the cold stone floor. The monk's face was etched with years of contemplation and sorrow. He carried with him a quiet strength, a spiritual anchor in a world torn asunder. "Sir Edmund," Brother Matthew greeted, bowing his head respectfully. "May I share a moment of counsel?" "Always, brother," Edmund replied, gesturing to a sturdy chair near the hearth. As Matthew settled, the flickering firelight revealed the deep lines on his face, the weight of countless prayers and confessions, war tests more than sword arms. "It rends the soul. I see it in your eyes, the strain of choices that wear upon your conscience." Edmund met the monk's gaze, the conflict within him laid bare. "I am torn between duty and survival, faith and pragmatism. Each day brings a new betrayal, a new reason to question the path I walk." Brother Matthew's voice was gentle but unwavering. "Remember, Edmund, that honor is not the absence of doubt, but the courage to face it. The Lord does not condemn those who struggle, only those who abandon their humanity." The knight bowed his head, absorbing the words like a salve for his restless spirit. Yet even as solace settled for a moment, the shadows of the evening lengthened. Later, as the household settled into uneasy quiet, the subtle sound of footsteps echoed down the stone corridors. A servant approached Lady Eleanor with a folded letter, the parchment worn and hastily sealed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal and unfolded the message. The letter was brief but laden with implication, secret correspondence from a known Yorkist sympathizer. Eleanor's heart quickened. The risks were immense. Discovery could mean ruin for her family and for Edmund's precarious position. Yet the information might be crucial to navigating the deadly political tides. She folded the letter carefully, eyes scanning the dim hallway before slipping the parchment into the folds of her gown. Her mind raced with the knowledge that trust was a fragile commodity, and betrayal often came cloaked in the guise of loyalty. The night deepened, and in the silence, Edmund and Eleanor found a fleeting moment of solace beside the hearth. They spoke in whispers, their words weaving a fragile web of hope and fear. "Whatever comes," Eleanor said, taking Edmund's hand, "we face it together." He nodded, the weight of the war pressing down but eased if only slightly by the steadfast bond between them. Outside, the wind howled, as if carrying the voices of a fractured kingdom. Within, the Mallory household braced against the gathering storm, bound by blood, love, and the uncertain path ahead. As dawn approached, the fragile peace of this night would shatter, thrusting Edmund ever deeper into the perilous dance of loyalty and survival. And somewhere beyond the walls, the wheels of fate turned relentlessly. The following days were marked by whispered conversations behind heavy oak doors and furtive glances exchanged in shadowed corridors. Brother Matthew's counsel continued to weigh on Edmund's heart. The spiritual guidance, a steady presence amid the swirling chaos. In the chapel's quiet solitude, Matthew spoke of forgiveness and the endurance of the human spirit. "The war demands much," he said, "but it is in our darkest hours that the light of faith can guide us." Edmund found himself returning to those words, clinging to them as he navigated the treacherous political waters where friend and foe often wore the same face. Meanwhile, Lady Eleanor's secret correspondence deepened, revealing glimpses of Yorkist intentions and internal fractures. Her role as advisor became ever more vital, even as the risk of exposure grew. One evening, as Edmund prepared for a council meeting, Eleanor pressed a small sealed note into his hand. "Read this when you can. It may hold the key to what we must do next." The weight of the note was heavier than its thin parchment. Edmund's eyes met hers, the unspoken understanding passing between them. In this world where bonds were tested and loyalties questioned, their unity was both shield and weapon. As Edmund stepped into the uncertain light of dawn, the faces of those he loved and the shadows of those who sought his downfall pressed upon his mind. The war was far from over, and every choice now carried the weight of life and death. The bonds of blood and love would be tested as never before, and Edmund Mallory stood at the crossroads of destiny, his heart torn but his resolve hardening for the trials yet to come. The great hall of Mallory Keep was thick with the scent of burning tallow and damp stone, the torches along the walls casting flickering pools of amber light that danced upon the faces gathered around the long oak table. Sir Edmund Mallory sat stiffly among the lords and knights of House Lancaster, his keen eyes scanning the assembly with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. The weight of the moment pressed upon him. The land was fracturing, old loyalties strained thin by the relentless ambitions of York and Lancaster alike. "We stand at a precipice," Lord Cumberland began solemnly, his voice low but commanding, and the winds of war howl louder with each passing day. "Our enemies gather strength, and yet within our own ranks, I fear, shadows lurk." Murmurs rippled through the room, whispers of doubt and betrayal barely contained beneath the veneer of unity. Edmund's gaze flicked to the faces around him, some familiar, some strangers brought by circumstance, and he noted the subtle signs: tightened jaws, darting eyes, hands clenched beneath the table. Lady Eleanor stood just behind Edmund, her posture regal despite the tension, her resolute eyes meeting his briefly in silent counsel. She was the steady flame in the tempest of uncertainty, and Edmund took comfort in her presence as the murmurs grew louder. "We cannot afford fractures," Edmund spoke up, his voice steady but carrying the weight of conviction. "Our strength lies in unity, yes, but unity without clear purpose is folly. We must be pragmatic. To hold fast to honor at the cost of survival is to doom us all." A ripple of unease spread. Sir Thomas Grey's name was no stranger in Edmund's thoughts, and now faced with the council's wary glances, he understood how precarious his position was. The old codes of chivalry warred with the brutal necessities imposed by war. Captain Robert Hale, a man of discipline and unyielding loyalty, nodded in agreement. "Edmund speaks well. We need strategy, not sentiment. The Yorkists grow bolder. We must be bolder still." Yet dissent came from Lord Warwick, his voice sharp and cutting through the room like a blade. "Boldness without caution is recklessness, Captain. We risk too much." The debate swelled, voices rising and falling like tides, until at last a hush fell as the heavy oak doors burst open. A breathless messenger stumbled in, his face pale, eyes wide with urgency. "My lords, urgent news from the south. A betrayal among our allies." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. The fragile calm shattered. Edmund's heart tightened. The gathering storm was no longer on the horizon it had arrived. As the council reconvened under the shadow of this grim revelation, Edmund felt the first real cracks forming in Lancaster's defences. The path ahead was perilous, fraught with uncertainty and shadowed by the threat of treachery. Yet within him a spark of determination kindled. He would navigate these treacherous waters, not as a blind loyalist, but as a survivor ready to face the cost of ambition and the price of power. Outside, the wind howled through the battlements, carrying with it the promise of war and the bitter taste of betrayal. Edmund knew the gathering storm would test every fibre of his being, and that the choices he made in these coming days would echo far beyond the walls of Mallory Keep. With one last glance toward Lady Eleanor, whose steady gaze met his with unspoken strength, Edmund rose. The war was coming, and he would meet it head-on, whatever the cost. The council dispersed into the chill night, each lord and knight burdened with the weight of uncertain futures. Edmund lingered, his mind racing through possibilities and perils. Somewhere in the shadows, enemies plotted, and the lines of loyalty blurred beyond recognition. He clenched his fists, knowing that honor alone would not save him, nor those he loved. Survival demanded more cunning, courage, and the willingness to walk a darker path. The gathering storm was not just outside these walls. It stirred within him as well. And as the torches guttered in the cold breeze, Edmund Mallory faced the dawn of a new, uncertain era, one where the price of power might be paid in blood and betrayal, and where the fate of England itself hung in the balance. The night deepened, but Edmund's resolve burned ever brighter. The war had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back now. The hall had emptied, but the echoes of debate lingered, weaving through the stone corridors like a restless spirit. Edmund paused at a window, the moonlight casting silver lines across the darkened courtyard below. The wind whispered secrets, and beneath that whisper he heard the faintest stirrings of doubt within himself and within those he called allies. A storm was gathering indeed, and in its heart lay choices that would define him, and the very fate of the crown they all sought to claim. The gathering storm was here, and Edmund Mallory was ready to face it. The cold night air bit sharply into Edmund Mallory's skin as he stood near the flickering glow of the campfire. Shadows leaped wildly across the faces of the men gathered, their murmurs weaving through the dark like restless ghosts. Captain Robert Hale's voice was low but firm, outlining the strategy for the coming dawn's skirmish. Edmund's keen eyes narrowed as he listened, sensing an unease beneath the surface, tension that seemed to thicken the very air they breathed. "We cannot afford another misstep," Edmund muttered, voice taut with urgency. "The Yorkists grow bolder, and our own ranks feel the strain." Hale nodded grimly, his jaw set in determination. "There are whispers, my lord whispers, of those who no longer hold Lancaster's cause close to heart." Edmund's gut tightened. The war was no longer fought solely on the battlefield. It seeped into the loyalties of those sworn to him, threatening to unravel everything he had fought to protect. He glanced beyond the firelight, eyes catching the silhouetted forms of sentries patrolling the perimeter. Trust was a fragile currency here, more precious than gold, yet easier to break. Meanwhile, within the stone walls of their modest manor, Lady Eleanor moved with quiet urgency. The soft rustle of silk skirts was the only sound as she entered her chamber, closing the heavy door behind her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she withdrew a sealed letter from beneath a loose floor-border secret correspondence from a Yorkist sympathizer that could shift the tides of fate. Her eyes, resolute despite the weight of anxiety pressing upon her, scanned the room one last time before hiding the missive once more. The distant thrum of war drums echoed faintly through the night, a relentless reminder of the storm gathering beyond their walls. Eleanor's heart pounded not from fear alone, but from the fierce determination to protect her family's legacy, even if it meant dancing on the edge of betrayal. Dawn broke in a muted haze, the morning mist clinging to the earth like a shroud. The camp stirred with nervous energy as men readied their arms, the metallic scent of steel mingling with the damp air. Edmund stood at the forefront, eyes sharp, senses alert. The skirmish that awaited was no ordinary clash. It was a test of loyalty, of trust, and of survival. The first clash of swords rang out suddenly, shattering the fragile calm. The battle was brutal and chaotic, cries of pain and rage ripping through the mist. Edmund fought with the fierce determination of a man defending not just land, but honor. Yet amid the tumult, a chilling realization: Dondan, ally, trusted and sworn to Lancaster, turned their blade with deadly intent. The shock was visceral. Edmund's breath caught as betrayal sliced through the chaos like a dagger. Men fell beside him, the ground slick with blood and shattered hopes. The ambush left their forces scattered and vulnerable, the cost of misplaced trust cruelly apparent. Retreat was ordered, the remnants of their once confident force bleeding away into the fog. Edmund's mind raced, grappling with the implications of treachery so close to home. What enemy lurked within their midst, and what price would be paid for this broken faith? Back at the manor, the weight of secrets pressed heavily on Lady Eleanor. Fear gnawed at her resolve, but she steeled herself. Her family's survival depended on navigating the perilous web of politics and deception. She knew the risk of exposure could shatter everything, yet silence was a luxury they could ill afford. In the quiet sanctuary of the chapel, Brother Matthew knelt before a flickering candle, his hands folded in prayer. The spiritual toll of the war was etched deep in his face lines of sorrow and doubt carved by relentless violence and loss. His whispered prayers sought guidance for Edmund, for their fractured world, and for the fragile hope that honor might yet endure amid the ashes of betrayal. As the sun climbed higher, casting harsh light on the remnants of the skirmish, Edmund stood amidst his weary men, the taste of bitterness thick in his mouth. Loyalties had fractured, alliances teetered on the brink, and the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty. Yet beneath the weight of despair, a spark of resolve ignited. To survive, Edmund knew, meant confronting not only external foes, but the shadows lurking within.